Hey everyone, my name is Eric Bond, and I'm one of the co-founders here at Hustle Fund. Welcome to today's session, which is called Why Did We Say No to You? Why? Okay, so VCs are so weird when it comes to saying no. For most of the last 15 years, I've been a founder before I started this fund. And when I was a founder pitching for VC money, rarely did I encounter a VC who gave me a straight answer like, Eric, we are going to pass on investing on you. It was usually something much more vague, like, okay, let's go ahead and check in again next quarter. And they would just sort of string me along. And if you ask for feedback as to why they aren't ready to invest, don't expect anything real. I mean, the reason why is that this VC industry loves optionality, and VCs are afraid to close options. Therefore, they tend to just string you along. It's getting better now than it was like 15 years ago when I first started pitching, but it's still kind of bad. So today, what we're going to do is get real and talk about why I personally say no to deals, sharing my top 10 reasons, and not to over promote Hustle Fund here, but one of our commitments is that when we talk to founders, we give them a clear yes or no decision, because the stringing along BS is a little bit too much. So let's take a look at the agenda. It's going to be a really fun session. Start with a super quick intro. I'm going to try to do this in under 1 second. You can time me. We'll talk about the top 10 reasons why we reject founders. And then we'll have plenty of time for answering your questions. So the idea here is I actually plan to speak for maybe about 20 minutes, I hope. And then I want to actually reserve the remaining time, about 40 minutes, answering your questions and committing to giving you some non-BS feedback about the nuances around rejection and so forth. A lot of these sessions, by the way, I've noticed are like about how do you get to yes, blah, blah, blah. But today we're taking like the negative end, right? So, but we'll still try to make it fun and educational. Okay, so actually before we jump into sharing a little bit about our sponsor today, I do want to also cite that for any questions that you have, please direct them to the Q&A portion of this Zoom session. That's gonna be the best way for us to moderate your questions coming through. I'm joined by our head of product, Mike Rapman. He's joining us as our producer today. You'll see his face and voice probably by the time we get to the Q&A, and it'll help to moderate some of those questions, and we'll get to as many as possible. If you're on the chat, please chatter. We love seeing your sarcastic comments. You can make fun of me, my garage, whatever it is. Maybe actually a good place to start is to share where you're based loosely. And also, what are you working on? That's always a nice way to introduce who's in the audience. All right, so what I want to say before we get into the meat of the content today, why we say no, is first provide a big shout out to our ongoing sponsor, NetSuite. We don't put together these sessions in an island. We actually need to rely on awesome support of sponsors like NetSuite. They've been our longest partner, and we love working with them. So a little bit about NetSuite. Getting to a yes from an investor often requires more than just nailing your pitch. Founders need to have a plan to scale both their business and their infrastructure. NetSuite, the #1 cloud-based ERP for startups, provides dashboards and pre-built reports that quickly and easily illustrate your momentum and progress to investors, giving them the confidence to offer additional funding. Access KPIs, workflows, and built-in financial reporting capabilities specifically tailored to your industry to ensure you're providing investors with the clearest view of your business possible. To learn more about NetSuite for startups, visit netsuite.com. We have a portfolio of over 230 companies here at Hustle Fund, and many of them are very happy NetSuite clients. So I encourage you to check out netsuite.com. Oh, right. So this is me. I say no a whole lot. Okay, let's get into the content now. So I'm sure that if you've been ever pitching for money, a person whose face and vest looks just like this have provided you vague responses on no. This is actually a bit of a throwaway slide. I just love the show Silicon Valley on HBO. This is Jared, and I just needed to find a way of working him into this presentation. Let's move on. Okay, if you're a millennial, by the way, you'll appreciate this movie poster, right? Remember this? Well, what we're gonna do is go through the top 10 reasons now that I feel inclined to reject founders. So the way that this is going to work is I'm going to essentially summarize what I hear from founders and then summarize my interpretation of what I'm actually hearing as a VC. and provide some color commentary about why all this context matters. So are you ready? All right, let's go ahead and do this. Oops. Okay. So first reason why we often reject founders. And on this slide, you can see all the acquirers who will buy our company will plan to sell in 3 years. Okay. And what I'm hearing, there's no way you'll be able to make money in this deal. We are not ambitious enough. I'm translating for the founder here. So this is actually a really big mistake that founders made, that I have made. By the way, all of these mistakes I'm going to share are things that I have personally done. So I own my own sins here. It's not a good idea to ever position yourself as trying to seek selling your company in such a short period of time. And the reason why is it might be okay for angels to hear this kind of thing, but for VCs, it's a big no-no, especially if you're at the seed stage. The reason why is as early stage funds, we need to hit a very specific threshold of mathematics in order to justify a company as being venture backable. It's not good enough to say like, hey, I'm founder Mike, and I'm going to 3x or 5x your money in the next 3 years after Google buys me for $20 million or something like that. We actually need to hit a multiple of about 50x or at least, or at Hustle Fund, we like to see 100x, meaning at the post-money valuation that we invest in your company, we think that Mike can 100x that valuation. So if I invest at a $1 million valuation, we think that he can sell his company at a $100 million valuation. And the reason why these multiples matter and why we have to swing so hard with very ambitious founders is that's the only way that the mathematics of a venture fund works, because most of your portfolio is not going to be fund returning. You might actually lose money on most of the bets that you make, but the power law that like one or two or a handful of companies that actually do produce outlier success pays for all of those investments and actually produces real profit to the investors. So when you hear things like we're going to sell in 3 years and these are specifically the companies, it's usually translated as like, this is not a team that is trying to swing hard enough to justify this crazy venture mathematics. Okay. I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of questions in the Q&A on this point, but don't include this slide. Even if you want, and by the way, here's the other thing too. I want to tell you a really quick story about Webflow, and I hope this isn't too confidential. So Webflow was the very first investment I made as an angel. When I wrote that check in 2013, I spoke to a team, and they actually wanted to flip that company for like $15, $20 million within a year or two. And that was their mindset. They were first-time founders. Now they're worth $2.1 billion in valuation. And what happened was they realized that their company was operating in a market that's much larger with much more momentum, that the opportunity is so large. The founder's own mindset evolved over time to be way more ambitious. So it doesn't make any sense to stick a flag on the ground and say like, we're going to sell in 3 years, because things change. You know, customer discovery changes, momentum changes, and you might evolve yourself into wanting to grow into like a multi-billion-dollar business over time. All right, I belabored that point. Let's move on to the second reason why we reject. By year 5, we expect to be generating $10 million in annualized income or revenue. What I'm hearing is it's going to take forever for this company to hit a really large market or to grow very large. It's very similar to the previous reason. So there's a general rule of thumb. I don't speak for every seed fund here, but for a company that's going to hit sort of the venture mathematics to hit like $1 billion in revenue or something like that, eventually, is, you know, we generally find that companies that are trying to go for $100 million in revenue by year 5 are those that are on the path to hitting like $1 billion in valuation and have the potential to become huge fund returning outcomes as a small VC fund, right? 100 million by year 5. There's a lot of problems in trying to do overly aggressive forecasting as an early company. One, it's all BS. Like you have no idea what's going to happen in the next 5 years, right? Like it's too early. So I generally find it to be a really poor exercise. Even though some VCs ask for it, I sort of like wave my hands at it. I think the second thing too is you got to keep in mind that a VC fund, and I speak only for VC funds, are generally designed to be 10-year vehicles. Meaning if I invest in Mike's company, within the next 10 years, ideally in the next 7 years, he's going to hit his liquidity, meaning he's going to SPAC, IPO, get acquired for $1 zillion. And so like all this has to happen in like within the fund's life generally, ideally. Doesn't always happen. If the company is growing really, really slowly and it's like a 20-year path to getting to liquidity, maybe you do hit that $100 million outcome by year 10 or year 15 or something like that. That's just too long for our investors to wait to get their return, right? So it has to be like really aggressive, fast growth. But in general, like I wouldn't chart out year after year growth expectations in terms of revenue, especially at the seed stage. Now it's a little bit different when you get to maybe the later stages, Series B and beyond, because at that point you should have some pretty decent sense of forecasting. And the expectations for those investors is a little bit different. It's more of like a spreadsheet exercise in terms of how you gain investment, right? It's like, oh yeah, you have 5-year trailing EBITDA and like, this kind of evidence of CAC to LTV ratio and so forth. And it's more of like a spreadsheet math thing. All right. So I hope that's clear. Let's keep going. Okay. This is like actually probably the top mistake that I personally made when I was a founder, which actually has to do with addressable market. So our TAM is $100 million. This literally was like the total addressable market of my first company that I spent 9 years on. All right. And the interpretation to the VC is like, this market is tiny as hell. I don't even want to bother with it. Okay. So again, let's go back to like the mathematics of venture. So VCs need to swing really, really hard when it comes to the investments that they make into founders, right? So if you want to actually have like a $1 billion plus outcome in order to return your fund to your investors. Now, let me actually take a step back and just define some of these things. Returning the fund. So let's say that me and Mike start a venture capital fund that's $10 million. Okay, we raised $10 million from a bunch of venture investors. Returning the fund is the milestone when you have returned the original investment back to your investors. So let's say that we only had one investor for $10 million. It's just returning Jane her original $10 million investment, right? And then anything beyond that is called carry mode, right? Or carry, which is just like essentially profit sharing. So beyond that $10 million, we return back another $10 million. On top of that, 20% is given to me and Mike as our fee. That's called carry. And the remaining 80% goes to Jane, right? And then that just keeps going. And there are funds out there that have like 100x that. I think Y Combinator has like a 50 or 100x kind of fund, which is insane. Lowercase Capital did this. But a top performing fund is considered 3x, meaning like Jane gives us 10 million and then we provide her $30 million back net of our fees. Anyway, so that's a little bit of that. So why does this relate to like total addressable market? Which is like, if you're going to be investing into a founding team that's really ambitious, they don't want to sell too early. Like they're really going for it. They need to be in a large enough market that they can grow into. If you capture 100% of the business in a market that's $100 million, that essentially means that you have no more growth after that. Maybe your business is like appropriately priced at like $100 million at that point, whatever, right? So a big market is really important. Now, you don't have to get into like McKinsey style analysis of like creating like all these slides to make the case of like, here's all the evidence that we're like $1 zillion business. Like in general, you just need to show something that that is large. Like if it's measured into billions of dollars, ideally 10 billion plus or more, or 5 billion plus or more, you're probably in a venture backable space at that point. Anything under $1 billion though is gonna be really tough in general. Okay. Let's keep going. I hope that this is fun for you. We're gonna have a really lively Q&A, I think, Mike, coming up after this. All right. This is one that actually counter quite a bit. So it's like me and Mike, my co-founder, we met last week at the hackathon and we won first prize. And now we're co-founders, right? And what I'm hearing is just like, this is not going to end well. Marriages of convenience where you met like a day ago just rarely work out. One of the top reasons for co-founder, for company failure at the early stage. In fact, maybe the number one reason is co-founder breakup. It's just like, the team has not had enough time to figure out like what their skills are, how they communicate challenges and so forth. When you think about a startup that you start with a co-founder, it's going to be very similar to a marriage. You should be in it to build for the next 7 to 10 years, at least by the time you hit your liquidity event. And many of you out there in this audience today are founders and understand how lonely, high stress, imposter syndrome laden this path is that you've chosen. It's enormously rewarding in other ways, but let's not like joke around. I mean, this is way more stressful than probably any other job where you're working for the woman, right, or man. Like that, like it's a different kind of level of stress, and this translates directly into the relationship, right? You're going to have hard moments with your co-founder. If you don't have good mechanisms and trust built in to work through those issues, then it's going to be catastrophic. All right. So I am very, very negatively biased towards teams that have just like formed due to marriages of convenience. It looked good on paper. Mike's an engineer. I'm a product and sales guy. Like on paper, it looks awesome. You know, that kind of thing. Like, yeah, it looks great, but you know, history does matter to us. And that's something that I like to dig into. Now, that said, let me give you a counterpoint. There still are outlier cases where this works out well. My favorite story of all time is Sid Viswanathan, who is one of the co-founders at TruePill. It's a unicorn in making, one of the most exciting healthcare companies, I think, in the United States, at least today. And he found his co-founder through a cold LinkedIn outreach, right? It's freaking wild, but it worked out. And it's been an insanely good partnership. So if it is a marriage of convenience and that it is what you have, like having a mechanism to show that you've worked out like your values are, your working style, any evidence to indicate that like this is going to be a long-term relationship that is viable, I think is going to be quite valuable for you to communicate to your investors. Let's move on. Okay, our technology is so differentiated. When the market sees what we're up to, we're going to go viral. All right. I call this the purple cow theory. There's a book by this guy, Seth Godin, who wrote this book called Purple Cow. It's essentially like a field of dreams kind of a thing, which is like, we're going to build something so cool that if we build it, they will come. What I hear, though, is a lot more cynical, which is just like, this team does not know anything about customer acquisition, and they don't even seem that interested in investing into channels to drive customer acquisition. Maybe that's a little bit of an unfair interpretation, but I see this one a lot, which is just like the technology is so good, it's just going to suck oxygen out of the room and pull it towards us. So I don't speak for other VC funds on this, because there actually are a fair number of VC funds who really, really care about technology and differentiation. At Hustle Fund, though, we kind of follow this adage, which came in the form of a tweet from this guy named Justin Can. He was a co-founder of Twitch. And he said, like, first-time founders focus on product. Second-time founders focus on distribution. And I'm very much into this notion, which is like, it's okay for us to even invest in the company that has the second or third best technology in the market. But if their distribution edge is amazing, I would bet on this team every time. Let me give you an example of this. So I see this a lot actually in enterprise SaaS, which is a team that is just forming, who, like, let's say that it's like a company that wants to build the next CRM for small businesses. Very crowded space, right? Whatever, right? So already I'm a little bit skeptical, like this is very crowded, but it's a big market. CRMs is like a really big market. But the founder, let's say, it was like the senior vice president of sales at HubSpot or Salesforce, or possibly even like a NetSuite. And the value prop is like, look, I have formed these relationships over the last 25 years of insane trust with these clients. They have committed to coming along to buy my product. Here's even some letters of intent or prepayments. Like, we're going to generate like $10 million in our first year. And we just started building. Like, that to me is like an insanely good pitch. I'm like, oh, smack. Like, this is a team that has real distribution edge, just like built into their DNA. That's exciting for me, more so than understanding the nuances of like why they chose to do React or, you know, these other kinds of technology choices in building their product, right? So we're very biased towards distribution, customer acquisition, sales at Hustle Fund. Just keep that in mind if you ever engage with our team. That those are the kinds of things that we like to see. All right. Okay, so this one is, I don't see this as much anymore, but it still happens. And there's a lot of caveats here, which is like, let's chat, but I need you to sign an NDA. And my response is like, nope, I'm not going to sign any NDA. So, okay, let me try to be a little bit fair about this. So like, there are some cases where like the company's entire model is based on unique technology. Sort of talking through like what I just said in the previous slide. If it's just like we have like a very specific kind of LiDAR technology, it's a really competitive space. IP is everything in this industry that I need to work in. And like people are actively trying to steal from each other in this market. Okay, like for those kinds of investors, I sort of get it to make the ask of an NDA. But in most cases, this actually is like countervailing the entire ethos around this notion of Silicon Valley. So what made Silicon Valley and makes Silicon Valley so interesting is the notion of technology transfer is so free, right? Like we have very, very lax laws, at least in California, when it comes to employers being able to sue their employees who leave from Google to Facebook and so forth. Like in some extreme cases when there's real IP theft, then yes, you can do that. But like it's generally fine for people to carry over their ideas from one company to the other. And this is what makes innovation so fast, at least in California historically. Now this is permeating throughout, I think, other regions too. And I do think that just like beginning with a social contract of trust is usually the best way to form a relationship, because outside of the business, like when the investor and you are getting together, it's really like the 7 to 10 year relationship again that you're signing up for. And starting out with just this idea of like, let's start with trust first is usually the richer path, I should say, than just beginning with like, I don't trust you, let's put in a prenup now and like, do that. So it's a big turnoff. Maybe it's a little bit unfair sometimes, but asking for an NDA up front is a turnoff. And it's really counter to the cultural ethos here at Silicon Valley, or at least Silicon Valley-based VCs like me. Okay. All right. I don't see this one as much, especially at the seed stage, but I do encounter it, which is like, we're making all this money, right? Each month. I'm like, great. And then you dig a little bit further and like, but in order to make $1, we have to burn $3, something like that. I'm like, oh. So like a couple things. A lot of founders tried to make the case that the revenue is what you need to focus on, which is the evidence of the product market fit. But if you're not doing this sustainably, you don't really have product market fit there, right? I mean, that doesn't feel like market pull to me. Now, again, there are certain classes of businesses where you just have to underwrite a lot of expensive growth in order to just have like escape velocity. And I understand that. But if you, and in some cases, actually burning $500,000 to generate your first $200,000 on a monthly basis on the first year could be the good strategy. But it's the way that like it's also framed in secondary kind of commentary of just like a lot of people say like we have product market fit at that point. For me, what I hear is just like, oh, this is a team that's so spendy. Right? They're just like burning so much cash, and it's going to be very difficult to turn off those spigots like later on. So like one of the things that I used to joke about when I was doing a lot of like paid acquisition was just like, it's like a cocaine addiction. Like once you begin your Facebook ad campaigns, your Google ad campaigns, you're actually seeing revenue generated as a result of it. It's very difficult to ever turn that off. In fact, it's so scary to turn that off because inevitably you're going to see some sort of dip that you can't predict, right? So for me personally, also just as a VC, when I hear these kinds of things and see this kind of activity, I just think this is a team that spends a lot of money. They're going to have to do a lot of subsequent fundraises. And with each fundraise, Hustle Fund is going to be diluted down pretty substantially. So by the time, even if they hit their escape velocity and IPO and so forth, how much are we going to own when it's all done? It may not be very much and could actually be a bad outcome for our fund. Okay. So I think I just have a few more here, and then we'll open it up to the Q&A, which will also be really fun. This one is just not a good fit for Hustle Fund. So if you're working on something super deep tech, which is like mining for diamonds or platinum, rare earth materials on asteroids, like the child in me and actually my 6-year-old son would be like all for it. We're just like, whoa, that is so cool, right? You're going out of outer space, creating these rovers. But that also sounds like a 25-year project. It's just going to be really difficult for us as a 10-year fund that's not designed around deep tech at Hustle Fund specifically to support it. Because again, for the similar reasons before, like it'll take a lot of money to underwrite this thing. We're a $33 million fund for our fund 2 right now. We just don't have the capital to underwrite that. Like you're better off going to like a multi-stage fund that can support you along the way. Something like a Lux Capital, which is really great on deep tech, has lots of money, so that they can also make the economics work for their fund because they have so much cash. and possibly even like the LPs that are patient enough to wait 20 years to get to that kind of an awesome outcome. All right, so that's a good, I guess like the general point here is like when you pitch, and if you do have one of these deep tech companies, make sure that you're pitching to the right kind of fund that likes to support those kinds of bigger bets. For our team, we're very software oriented. All right. This one actually breaks my heart because I actually think it's really unfair. I plan to quit my job after I raise this round. It's a chicken egg thing. So, and I think my statement is a little bit unfair. It's not just like free me from my horrible day job. There's a lot to discuss here. I could actually rant for an hour about how problematic this is. But the reality is today our fund is designed, our main fund, to support only full-time founders. And that's actually a social contract that we have to set with our own investors, because being full-time on a project is something that is an indicator of de-risk to our LPs, our limited partners, our investors, to show that we're investing in very serious teams, because it's really difficult to invest in part-time founders and discern who's actually serious and who's actually like a wannabe, right? It's really hard. But the moment that you cross over and being full-time, there is an element that's clearly de-risk. Now, this is a problem, okay? And we're actually contributing to this problem, and we're trying to find alternative ways of fixing this. The reality is that most people aren't that rich to spend like 3 or 6 months or a year to just like bootstrap and like go full-time on a project. Like you have to have money in order to do this. And this is really what's unfair. There's plenty of part-time founders out there who can be great founders, unicorn level founders, future zillionaires. But the reality is that, they're saddled by student debt. They're taking care of like a sick parent. They have kids, a wife, mortgage, car payments, all that stuff that happens in life. So it is like a true chicken and egg. We have actually some new programs that are spinning up that's specifically designed for part-time founders at Hustle Fund. But this is one of those unfair like things that is like a institutional privilege problem. But that said, like you got to frame this a little bit differently. I think like even if this is true, you can maybe frame it as like, we are all in on this thing. In the next 45 days, we're planning to be full-time. We're already starting this transition. And you're so lucky, VC, that you get an early look before we're actually like going to be full-time. But like the train has already left the station. I would frame it a little bit more concretely. So we can talk about that one. That's a really big topic. This is my last slide, and then we're going to just open this up to Q&A. It doesn't happen that often, but occasionally I'll hear a racist or sexist comment from a founder in a pitch. And racism is a lot less common, but the sexism is a little bit more common than I expect. It'd be something like they'll make a joke that insults their wife or girlfriend. It's usually a dude who does this. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Right? Like, if that's like the way that you sort of view your most important relationship, then I don't want to have a relationship with you. Right? Or a little bit more common, and I actually get really triggered by this. It's like a child walks in on the Zoom, right? And then the founder will just like snap. And like sometimes I even say like, get the F out of here. I'm like working right now. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, that's how you treat your children? I mean, like, again, like one of the most important relationships of your life. Like, to me, like personal values like this, whenever they're exposed in these kinds of minor ways, translates to professional values, right? So don't be racist or sexist. Just be a good human being. It's like a good life tip, right? And obviously, like, don't allude to even like minor references to racism or sexism or abuse. That's not cool at all, especially in this era. Right. Okay. So let's see. I think we're in the Q&A portion here. I went on for about 20 minutes and Mike is coming back on. I'm sure you have a bunch of questions for this next session. If you have questions, please pump them into the Q&A section. That's the best way for us to moderate. Mike, have you heard anything good coming in from the audience on today's topic?
We've got some great questions, Eric, and you definitely struck a few chords there. So we'll get to those. Once again, reminder to everyone, please post your questions in the Q&A so that we can monitor and answer those. I'm going to throw it first to Marco. He asked the very first question of today, and it was a great one. If I get a no from a investor, how do I judge if like something in my pitch is really wrong versus it's truly not a fit and I should just talk to more investors?
Awesome question, Marco. Thank you so much for asking that. So, as I mentioned earlier, like you can ask for. I'm gonna turn off my share for now. Uh, you can, you're gonna not be able to expect, I think, a real answer from VCs, but I do think you should still ask for the feedback. And the way that you framed it is really good, which is just like, hey, I'm looking for feedback, and like really just set the social contract with them too on email. Just like, I really want like honest directness, and I know that's coming from a good place in your heart. Is it like, was it a problem with the pitch that you saw today? Is it a problem with the market? Was it me? Like anything that you can do to help me with my fundraise process, even if it's just one sentence, would be really helpful. I think you just explicitly ask, right? And if the answer is too vague, then another path to sort of do this would be like, like if there's someone that can help you back channel, like a founder that is within like the VC ecosystem, like, oh, Mike actually invested in my friend Eric. I'm gonna reach out to Eric and see if they can talk to Mike. It's always helpful to know that. But let me sort of just leave you with this, which is rarely is a no a permanent no. Again, like VCs love to preserve optionality. I talked about this actually in my own fundraise. So I'm the head of the fundraising committee here at Hustle Fund. We're a very small team. So I've heard a no 13 times in a row from one LP who ended up becoming one of our largest investors out of our first fund. Right? There's people who have said no to me for 40 months in a row. I literally ping them every month, but I still continue to do it because there's a lot of reasons why people say no. It could be a timing thing. It could be a lot of variety of reasons. So I think the next best thing is to do the following, which is if someone says no to you or ghosts you or whatever, I would ask whether they'd be interested in being added to your investor newsletter anyway. Okay. Why is this important? Well, it turns out that, investors, even those that don't choose to invest, love to see this stuff. It's like a very, very voyeuristic thing to sort of track the progress of founder Mike and all that stuff. But what it ends up becoming is a drip campaign for your next fundraise. So if I say no to Mike, and I usually am not the most informed person, like we have to make these decisions kind of quickly. But Mike actually produces really great month-to-month updates explaining his vision at his own pace, controlling the narrative. And it gives me like 6-8 months of these wonderful drip campaigns to show the progress of his business, show his talent as an operator. Then I may be more inclined to say yes in the next raise. And this has happened several times at our fund where we said no initially. And then like founders were kind enough to say yes to us later on once we realized like, oh, actually, these are great founders. So the win here is like, get them onto your newsletter. And actually for those who are ghosting, just say like, hey, unless you say otherwise, I'm just going to add you to the newsletter. Just ask for permission later, right? Okay, I'm hoping that helps. Mike, you want to move on to another question here?
Eric, that was great. I actually want to riff with you on this for one more second.
Yeah.
How many no's should I hear before I like really sit down introspectively and I say like, okay, something is systemically wrong with how I'm pitching things?
Well, Philip, here's my personal take. You should assume that unless they actually explicitly say no, say go away, don't communicate with me, that to me means that it's still open season that they might want to invest in the future. So most of the no's that I get are just like, not this time, or too busy, or it's not usually like I have no interest. Maybe like less than 1% of the people that I've pitched, and there's been over 1,000 pitches I've run so far, easily less than 1%, less than 10 people have ever said like, I do not want to do business with Hustle Fund, right? It's just like, it's way off thesis or something like that, right? But most are really vague about it. So for me, like until I hear explicitly, like I would prefer not to do business with you and you no longer need to communicate with me, that is my cue to say like, thank you very much for your time and best of luck to you. Other than that, I'm just going to assume that they're inviting me to continue to ping them on a month-to-month basis forever until they give me that response.
Persistence and tell your story.
Yeah, I mean, like persistent. Yeah, exactly. You summarized it perfectly, Mike. It's just like I am actually really impressed by founders who are also persistent with us, right? I mean, like in some ways is like an exposure of their own values of like how tenacious they are in how they run the rest of their operation too.
Makes sense. Let's switch topics here for a bit. I love this question from Steny. So you talked a bit about how high cash burn can be a huge red flag, obviously, because you're losing money. What about a very low cash burn? Is that also a red flag because you're obviously not operating at a high enough cadence?
Man, this is a really great question. So I come from like a bootstrapper background, and I have actually, and so does like Elizabeth and Sheehan, actually. Interesting. Like all the companies that we started had a long period of bootstrapping prior to raising capital later on in the company's life and the respective businesses that we ran. So I love teams that run lean, that just seem to have there's like that term, right? Punch above your weight, right? You're like the little person who's like fighting the heavyweight, and it just seems to be actually like making it happen. So lean burn with like good results is something that's really cool. That said, though, I've learned actually in backing some of these founders that there is usually like a very difficult mindset transition after you've raised capital. So maybe in your first like $250,000 that you raise and you're bootstrapping off that, kind of like running lean and, you know, being super cheap and scrappy is awesome. But there comes a point where you just have to trigger like abundance mindset of like, now that me and Mike have raised $2 million, we need to actually like invest more aggressively, right? Like we should get comfortable like increasing our burn from like 10,000 a month to like 70,000 a month or something like that. Maybe not that high, you know, to afford the right kind of team and like make the vision happen. And this unfortunately is like the social contract that you've chosen if you go down the VC path. So a quick side rant here. The best thing that you can do in your business is to see whether you can run it without raising any money, angel or VC money. Because once you go down the VC path, there's an expectation of very high growth and velocity that you're choosing to walk down with your VC, right? So if you want to like spend 10 years growing the business at your own pace, try to find non-dilutive sources of capital, prepayments of your clients up front, et cetera. But when you go down the VC path, the expectation is that you want to grow really fast and really big, right? So you got to like find a way of being able to show that if you give us this money, we know how to invest it very well on the right level of aggressiveness, but not like too spendy where like we're going to run out of cash in like another 6 months. Yeah.
That makes sense. Build your business first and then figure out how to fund it for the kind of growth you're hoping to get.
Yeah.
Katya asked a couple of great questions. I'm going to slightly paraphrase and summarize them. So you mentioned sometimes we'll see a slide like $100 million market, and that's very small. I'm sure you've also seen slides that say our market is 10 billion, but it's not really shown how that it can be true. So to what detail and how does a founder go about actually presenting their market to a VC to minimize the risk of getting no as an answer and being convincing?
Yeah. Again, like my rule of thumb here is like, especially at the seed stage, VCs are generally pretty forgiving about how you size market. If it's like more than $5 billion of opportunity for me, that's like fine. Like that seems like you could build like a really large business here. If it's like under $1 billion, it'll probably be like an automatic pass for all the reasons I shared earlier. It's just like, it's going to be really difficult to create like an outsized outcome in like a market that size. So how you arrive there should be credible. It shouldn't just be like, I had a dream last night and like, you know, an angel told me it's like $5 billion. Like that's not going to be good enough. If there's like at least like some data from Gartner or McKinsey or something they can point to, just that vaguely shows you that the market's like roughly this size, I think that's good enough for now. I do think that the market question becomes way more important the later that you go in your fundraise. So like, you know, by the time we get to your growth stage, like people are going to want to know your serviceable addressable market, your TAM, like, you know, all the adjacencies of other markets, maybe like breaking it by geos and all that stuff, because it's really relevant for scaling your growth. But in the early days, it's just like, I'm just getting to know who my customer is. I'm not quite sure what my persona customer is. Like there's like bigger existential questions than actually like a perfectly defined market. So yeah, that's my response.
Makes sense. I'm going to throw it over to Derek next because he was clearly listening to the response that you just gave on follow-ups and how to get past ghosting and no's. And he wants to get into tactics, which I love. So do you actually send multiple emails on the same exact chain? Do you change the subject line? Do you send new emails?
Yeah.
Talk us through the tactics a little bit because I know you're great at that.
So in active fundraising, I'll usually ping people on a weekly basis. In non-active fundraising, I'll probably ping them on a monthly basis. So let me tell you what we do like in the most aggressive case during active, right? So the first thing is like I want to get on the call or Zoom with my LP prospect Mike. So as soon as we've had that exchange, I'll end the meeting by saying like, "Hey, thanks for like your consideration of Hustle Fund. In the next minute, I'm going to send you some materials which you can review, and a couple days from now, I will check in to see if you have any reactions or questions about anything I just shared." So notice what I did there. Like we have a conversation. I just pitched someone, and then I committed to within 1 minute, saying that I'm going to send them all my due diligence materials, which usually includes like my full deck, a data room, and some other kinds of interesting statistics and like points, like maybe like mentions in the press and so forth. And then 2 days later, I'll reach out and say like, "Hey, just checking in. I want to see if you have any questions." Okay. And then if they ghost me again, I'll reach out a couple days later saying like, "Checking in, see if you have any questions. Thank you for the consideration. By the way, I'm going to go ahead and add you to our investor newsletter." Usually I offer that in the meeting too, but like, and I'll say like, on a monthly basis at midnight on the dot on the first of each month, expect to see an update from Hustle Fund on the state of our investments, right? This is actually something that we do religiously. We've never missed that midnight deadline for the last 40 months. After that, I'll reach out again on a weekly basis until we're done fundraising on the fund, active fund, and then move them into like the monthly cadence. So like, usually I check in by saying like, "Hey, here's a new article on us," or just like, so I'll do like kind of every other. I'll be like, one will be like, "There's some new news on Hustle Fund. Like this company just raised a huge Series A and we were mentioned. Just thought you might be interested." And then the other email after that would be on a weekly basis, just checking in to see if any other questions or consideration. Happy to jump in on the call. And then the next one is just like, "Here's another article on us," or just like some interesting movement. Then the monthly newsletter comes out. So like there's like ways to sort of check in, but really it's not that creative. It's usually like a couple of words. It's just like, "Hey, checking in. Thank you for the consideration. Happy to answer your questions." All right. And then maybe after I do this like 15 times, I'll say like, "Look, like I realize that you must be pretty busy. If you explicitly think that's not a fit, just let me know and I can stop reaching out to you. But otherwise, I thought that it'd be nice to just keep you informed." Most people want to stay informed. And then usually at that point, it's a pretty good call to action to come back. And then when we're done fundraising, they're on the monthly newsletter forever, right? So there's people that I've been working on for 4 years almost, trying to get them ready for Fund 3 or Fund 4. But this is the way that I do it. Now, the key to really good fundraising is actually awesome organization. So have your CRM pipeline really, really clear about whom you're talking to on the investor end. Use those reminders very well of like, Mike, reach out, like just emailed him, reach out in 2 days, right? And then like I log into the CRM every day, see who I need to reach out to. It's usually like 15 people. I fire off all those messages and then set reminders 2 days later, a week later for the next round of messages. All right. Hopefully that gave you some tactics to think about.
That was a great playbook, Derek. Hope you were taking notes because that's exactly what you need to do. Let's go to Sean next. I like his question. So he basically keeps getting too early as a reason for a no from ostensibly early or pre-seed stage funds. How does he read that?
Sorry, can you say he keeps getting what?
They keep telling him that he's too early, even though they say that they invest at the earliest possible stage.
Every VC fund, including Hustle Fund, says that they are open to investing in teams at the idea stage or really, really early. Most do not. And the reason why they say this is, again, for optionality, right? It only is to the benefit of the VC fund to understand who's in market as early as possible, even if they choose not to invest at the pre-seed stage. So when it comes to true pre-seed specialists, there's not that many. It's like us, precursor, A4. Like there's just like, maybe a dozen to 2 dozen emerging managers that really, really focus on this pre-seed stage. So a good resource to check out is like anything that Samir Kaji. He is a former head of banking for First Republic Bank. He's now left, but he maintains a really good database on pre-seed and seed investors. Samir Kaji is his name, Kaji. That's a good place to start to really get a sense of like who's coming in super early. I think like in those kinds of situations, it's really good to just clarify back, like, for my edification, what is specifically the milestones that you need to see reached in order for teams to start to be a good fit for your fund, right? And specifically around traction or customer development, like what is it that you need to see? So it'd be good to sort of collect that information. Yeah, I mean, like there's like everyone wants to see a team early. And they have VCs again have really good mechanisms to try to string you along. It's like, this is great. We're excited to hear what you're up to. Like we would love to actually circle up with you in another quarter, and they'll just keep doing this every single time, right? Until they'll say like, oh wow, you've done so well, but now you're too late for us. So this happens, and unfortunately, like this has actually happened at Hustle Fund too. Like a classic example of this is just like a part-time team that's just like, we really can't do this. Like it's so idea stage, and you're still working at Google or whatever, and like there just isn't enough confidence here right now that you're serious about this. And then sometimes it is too late. It's just like they went through Y Combinator directly from their day job, and then they're raising at like a $25 million post-money valuation. Now I'm just like, well, shit, like we totally missed this, right? Because like it kind of slipped through this kind of edge case. So to some degree, I'm embarrassed to say that we're a little bit guilty of this as well, but we really are trying to be true pre-seed specialists at our fund.
Makes sense. Now let's talk a little bit about how many VCs folks should be pitching. This is an anonymous question that I'm slightly paraphrasing, but let's say that I've pitched 10 or 20 VCs and none of them have really demonstrated interest. Maybe it's ghosting, maybe no's. Do I pitch 20 more? Do I stop it and reassess? How do I take it?
Wow, that's a great question. So my whole strategy when it comes to fundraising for our fund, as well as for our founders, is I love advocating for brute force, meaning this is a volumes game. Yeah, you got to like dial for the dollars. To get to our first fund of $11.5 million, we pitched 700 people to get to 70 commits. So that was about 10% of people ended up giving us cash. All right, in fund two, ratios are a little bit better, but it was a lot of pitches, over 500 for that one, I think. So there used to be a rule of thumb, which was like for every $100,000 that you raise at the seed stage, expect to pitch 100 people. I think actually that ratio has gone down a little bit more for like the benefit of the founders. Maybe it's not that high anymore. But if you come from like a position lacking privilege or network, like I think that ratio could still hold. So now here's a difference. Maybe you should stop pitching VCs for now. Whoever asked this question, right? Like perhaps a better place to start would be angels. Maybe starting with like someone who is an accredited investor. It could be your dentist, your neighbor, maybe someone who is actually an angel investor. Those folks tend to have much faster decision making when it comes to investing. Now their check sizes won't be as large. Most angels don't write like $500,000 checks. Maybe they write $50,000 checks or $25,000 checks. But if you put together a party round of 20, 30 people that can do that, that's fine. I mean, that's not a negative signal in our view or in this industry anymore at all. So start with the angels and then maybe move up to the VCs once you see a little bit of momentum. But 20 no's from 20 VC funds is nothing. I actually do think that a proper process should be at least, if you're pitching to VCs, which I'm, again, not advocating, like at least 50, ideally like 70. And you do this within 2 weeks too. We have a video on how to run your fundraising process on YouTube. If you search for Hustle Fund, you can go to our channel and we actually describe what that 2-week process looks like of how you actually design this entire process. So I hope that helps.
Awesome. Thanks for tackling that, Eric. Next question is brought up by Wheats, and she brings up a really interesting topic on the human dynamics that take place during a pitch. Sometimes it seems like the conversation is exciting. You get lots of great questions, and then like very quickly it just becomes a no. And sometimes in the pitch, there's just not a lot happening and it feels like there's no interest from the room. Yeah. How actively should you pay attention to that, manage that, and read reactions before you hang up the Zoom meeting for that first call?
Yeah, great question. So we actually have an entire presentation on the mechanics of pitching on Zoom specifically. It's called How to Fundraise and Close on Zoom. You can check this out. It's from a couple of weeks ago that me and Mike ran this session too. Again, go to Hustle Fund, search for Hustle Fund on YouTube, and you'll find it there. Now, here's the thing that I love when it comes to pitching on Zoom, and I do this myself when I pitch. I love to pitch without the slides. So the problem with slides is that it forces everyone through the exact same narrative path, right? Like, so maybe like Mike is one investor who cares about market a lot and wants to just talk about that. Maybe Eric is an investor that only cares about engineering and technology a lot and only wants to talk about that. And you're trying to build a deck that pleases everyone, which in some ways, ironically, will please no one, right? Because it's really difficult to do this. So what I like to do is when I pitch on Zoom, I use no slides. And then I'm intently looking at all the faces, trying to get clues because people have terrible poker faces on what's interesting and what's not interesting. And so when I get to things like market or whatever, and I see Mike starting to like unconsciously nod his head, I see that as a cue to dig deeper into that. If I see people are bored, I try to tell a story to snap people out of this, right? It's just like, oh, like, Eric's on the phone or something like that. And just like, let me tell this crazy thing that happened to me, like with an engineering problem that we overcame or something like that. Try to like mix it up to like get people back, their attention back. Now, if everything is really going badly, and it will happen, then stop pitching and then try to turn this into a feedback session, right? Like just stop trying to sell them on your company and just be like, look, I wanted to get your advice on like a couple things here. Like right now, the biggest struggle that we have is around getting our like LTV to CAC ratio in a healthy place. For companies that are sort of similar to us, like what channels have you seen them invest in that worked really well? Like anything around like their campaign structures for their Facebook ads or Instagram ads that worked. Just stop trying to pitch them and just see if you can just suck their brains of knowledge on something that's like helpful for either your fundraise process or your company, right? And then just be really clear that like you don't give a shit. Like don't say like I don't give a shit about you, but just like try to get that power dynamic back a little bit of like, look, I think I'm done pitching you here, so I'm just gonna talk. We're just gonna talk as people, and I'm gonna try to at least make the most of like the remaining like 20 minutes that we have here. I think that's sort of the way to go, and expect like 10-20% of your pitches to kind of end up like this, but you can still come out with a win, right? And even then, like I would still offer, even if it wasn't like the greatest experience, still offer to add these people to your investor newsletter, because you might find that maybe you pitched the wrong person within the fund, but there could be the right person in the fund, and there still is a mechanism to keep that fund warm with you through this kind of a passive fundraise process of just getting them updated on the newsletter. I hope that helps.
I think that makes a lot of sense. So we are running up, I think, maybe on our last one or two questions.
Yeah.
And Eric, you sparked a lot of discussion when you were talking about part-time founders and founders supporting themselves with jobs while building a business. So I'll try to build a case here that kind of combines a lot of questions that were asked. Michael, I'll give you credit for asking it first. So let's say that I have a job. It's a very flexible job. Maybe I can do it 20, 30 hours a week. It pays the bills. And I'm very resourceful, and I spend 40 to 60 hours a week on my startup. Does that still mean that I'm a part-time founder? Should I not talk to VCs until I'm able to actually quit that other job? Expand that a little more for us, Eric.
Yeah, Michael, I feel you. My first company, I bootstrapped for 3.5 years while having a full-time job. Same thing. I was able to do my work in about 30 hours a week. And I spent about 50 hours a week working on my startup. And I did that for 3.5 years until we were cash flow positive, and that's when I was ready to quit. Unfortunately, the optics of having a full-time job while running a company is really poor. So one, it's again, like very, very hard to tell who is serious or not, even in those kinds of hours that you're committing when you're part-time. Like that's just like really difficult to explain to you're like a fund's investors. Like I'm investing in Mike, and I know he's like a senior engineer or director of engineering at Microsoft right now, but like, believe me, he's going to move. Like it invites a lot of hard scrutiny. That's part one. Part two, though, is just like, I thought I had a second point here. What was my second point? So I guess like my whole strategy, if I were in your situation, is I would focus more on the angel discussions. So there's like a massive difference between angels and VCs. VCs, we have investors we have to satisfy, right? Like I only get to do my job because of two constituents. First and foremost are the amazing founders who have graciously said yes to us. And like, it's an incredible honor to be in their service. But I also have a fiduciary responsibility to my LPs, my limited partner investors, right? And so that actually can create conflicts of interest at times, to just the fact that I have investors. When you're an angel and investing off of my own balance sheet, like it's my money. So if I think that Mike, who's working as a senior director at Microsoft, is smart and is going to be doing this, like I'm just risking my own capital. Like I am my own investment committee here. So I actually think that indexing towards angels to put together like enough capital to allow you to be comfortable in moving on from your full-time job is probably the way to go. Maybe the first 250,000 or $500,000. And then I think you'll be better positioned to make the case for VCs later on. So that's kind of the way that I would suggest doing this.
I think that's a really great page in the playbook. And I'll close this out with a question that I would ask myself, but I think the audience will benefit from it. A lot of the time, I, as a founder, will receive an email from an investor that's actually quite thoughtful. And it says, we're going to pass for these reasons. Perhaps it's your market, perhaps it's your product, perhaps it's something else. If those reasons are clearly articulated, should I still respond to that email and address them? Or should I just say, thank you and move on?
Yeah, in general, once the decision's made, the decision's made. I would say that I wouldn't counter it unnecessarily, because I don't think it would be the best use of your time. It's really hard to dig yourself out of the hole from there. In fact, I've never heard of anyone successfully doing it. What I would say is this. I would say, thank you so much. You've made some really, really thoughtful points. And this is something that I deeply appreciate because it's rare to find in this industry. And then I'd run the call to action, which is like, if it's okay with you, because I think we can find ways of overcoming this perhaps over time, can I invite you to join our investor newsletter? It comes out on a monthly basis. We can keep you abreast. And, that's one way to sort of track our progress and hopefully alleviate some of your concerns over time by showing and not doing, doing, not telling, whatever you know what I'm saying, right? Doing, not telling, whatever.
Yes.
So like, I think that's the only way to treat it, is just be grateful and then say like, I'd love to just like stay connected. And here's the mechanism by which I would like to invite you to stay connected with me. I think it's the best you can do. And you can turn those no's into yeses. That's a way better setup than trying to force it down right now.
Sounds awesome.
All right. Well, Mike, I think that's all we have time for today. I know there were a lot of great questions, a lot of great chatter today. To everyone that spent your hour with us, thank you so much for joining us. I also wanted to provide another final shout to our sponsors, NetSuite, that allow us to put together this series. We will produce a recording for this event and put it up in the next few days. So look out for that. Again, we have a really active YouTube channel. Search for Hustle Fund on YouTube, and you can see some of our past sessions that I cited. But to all of you, I hope that these no's, those reasons for saying no's were educational for you, and you can permutate that into yeses for your future pitches. So thanks again for your time. Stay safe and good luck with your pitching.